Good afternoon, and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland, where we are devoted to conversations of consequence that help democracy thrive. It's Wednesday, July 30th, and I'm Zaria Johnson, reporter and producer with IdeaStream Public Media, and moderator for today's conversation. Today is the final forum of the City Club's free outdoor summer series, Underneath the Chandelier, at Playhouse Square. Cleveland's downtown is home to two large, historic, and important bodies of water. As we continue to develop our city, we must reposition ourselves to consider Cleveland as a dual waterfront city, one where the lakefront and riverfront are equally vital to our urban future. This summer, professionals from the American Institute of Architects, American Planning Association, American Society of Landscape Architects, and the Urban Land Institute, hosted From Cleveland to Coastland, a design your own adventure exploration of Cleveland's downtown, lakefront, and riverfront developments. Today, we'll discuss the results of the adventure's collective experience and expertise, offer insights on placemaking, architecture, and real estate development, and share impactful ideas for transforming connectivity between the shores and the core. Today, I'll be in conversation with Melanie Cortica, Executive Director of the Urban Land Institute Cleveland, Allison Lucas C. Love, Managing Director of Major Projects at Greater Cleveland Partnership, and Gregory Soltis, a Senior Designer at RDL Architects. A reminder for our live stream audience, if you have a question for our guests, you can text it to 330-541-5794, and City Club staff will try to work it into the second half of the program. Members and friends of the City Club of Cleveland, please join me in welcoming Melanie, Allison, and Gregory. So before we get started, we'd like to encourage our audience members here in person and over the live stream to just take a minute to think about your favorite place to view the lakefront or the riverfront, and think about how you would walk there from here in Playhouse Square. If you're thinking that it might be difficult, or you might have a hard time navigating, or it might not be possible at all, then this might be a conversation that'll stick with you. So just keep that in mind as we're talking a bit today. So Allison, I want to start with you, and I'd like you to talk a bit about the Cleveland to Coastland partnership. We know that it represents a few different specialties from the design community, real estate development, architecture, planning, and engineering, and maybe even more. So can you tell us about what the partnership is and how it came to be and what the need for it is here in Cleveland?
Absolutely. Thank you, Zaria. Thank you, everyone, for being here and to contribute to this important conversation. So in fall of 2023, about the time that the city was revealing its North Coast Master Plan, there was a lot of momentum happening with the Bedrock Riverfront Master Plan, everything going on around Irishtown Bend, lots of private-public development conversations happening. I found that I was having a lot of conversations with individuals, with leaders of the AIA, ASLA, APA, ULI, but the way that we kind of do things here, our sort of default is to do things in those silos. And so there wasn't a lot of conversation happening across those sectors. And it was really a sort of a spark of let's collaborate, let's bring everyone together. And very quickly, this mutual interest in not only the waterfront developments that were happening from a major projects perspective, but the connectivity, and more so the lack of connectivity. And how do we create a Cleveland that works for everyone? And how do we really take this idea of a waterfront community and make it the reality? So it's not just it is more than perception. It is that reality. So we came together, we planned a couple of events. Greg will go into the history that really laid the foundation of what led us to, in June, to create amazing race style design your own adventure that started at North Coast Yard and dropped people off throughout the community at various points along the riverfront. And we asked people to design their own adventure, design their own walking path back to the lakefront. And while we had folks from, again, across sectors, architecture, landscape architecture, those involved in real estate and other design professions, it was really interesting, and we'll go into some of the results that we found, just how many sort of aha and inspirational moments were created from just the simple act of walking your city, as opposed to kind of the way that we often navigate. And some of you might be thinking in your head, like, if I'm in Playhouse Square right now and I want to go down to the 9th Street Pier, I'm probably going to move my car. You don't have to do that, but that might be your first inclination. So this is really just the catalyst and the start of where we'd like to take this conversation of transitioning Cleveland into the coastland that it can and should be.
Thank you. And I'm glad that you mentioned a few projects that are kind of already underway, like the North Coast Connector, Irish Town Bend. And I know we're not here to talk about those projects, but I think it would be helpful to explain, Melanie, if you can, the role of this partnership in sort of taking us from these individual big projects to a well-connected city. What's needed, resources, approach, how do we get there?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. I'm Melanie Kordick, again, Executive Director with the Urban Land Institute. The Urban Land Institute is a nonprofit, nonpartisan land use organization that really brings together, convenes individuals who work within land use and real estate. So these architects, these urban planners who got together during phase 2 and were dropped off at those 2 very important nodes, as Aria had just mentioned, from the riverfront to the lake and walking to feel that connectivity. So combining those interdisciplinary partners is really key, like Allison had mentioned, to get a variety of feedback and opinions throughout that experience. And we'll continue to gather that feedback today as well. But we really want to create a coordinated framework between those projects. The Urban Land Institute can gather those interdisciplinary professions in various ways, like educational conversations like today, to continue that conversation. We've also recently done a project called a Technical Assistance Panel, where we studied the bulkheads infrastructure along the Cuyahoga River and how those could potentially be prohibitive to the economic development along the riverfront. That's a very specific land use issue that we were able to study to, again, talk more so about connectivity as a whole for the entire city.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And Gregory, I want to bring you into this conversation too. Can you talk about how we got here? Many of us know that, or may know that Cleveland is an industrial city, but we may not understand the impact that has had when it comes to our access to the lakefront and the riverfront. Because can you set the stage for us? What does being an industrial city mean, and how does that create barriers that we see today?
Sure. So we understand that we're an industrial city, but I don't think we often think about the fact that an industrial city was a new thing that came about as a result of the second industrial revolution in the late 1800s. And so this new city, had to be fashioned in order to receive mass amounts of raw material and then have places to, transform that raw material into finished goods and then ship that out into the world. So transportation networks become really primary. And we are in a perfect place in between the coal fields down in West Virginia and Western Pennsylvania, and where oil was discovered in Western Pennsylvania, and the materials that are needed to make steel, for example, that are up by Lake Superior, and we have a river and a lake. And the area down by the river wasn't really settled when we were a New England village, settled by people from Connecticut, because you could get malaria if you lived down there. So they built the city up here, and that left the riverfront, which was really great. And the river became a workhorse for industry, and the river valley filled up with docks and factories and railroads, kind of creating, an invisible, like a legacy of invisible water for us. Our ancestors looked at that as something great because it meant they could put food on the table, and they weren't necessarily so concerned about recreating on the river, although there were parks you could go to like Edgewater. And a last aspect that I think is important to think about in laying the foundation is that, parks also were a relatively new thing, public parks in the late 1800s, which were kind of a reaction to the Industrial Revolution as well. And so, all this time now we're trying to overcome our industrial legacy without erasing it and mixing industrial uses, living, and other uses, recreational uses on the waterfront, and really making the connections from downtown to the river and to the lake better. So you would choose to walk from one to the other.
And so when we think about what we're dealing with today when it comes to access, can you tell me a little bit more about this Design Your Own Adventure sort of workshop activity, and how the public helped you figure out where we are now and what that access looks like?
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely. I'll take this one to begin with. So the idea of the design your own adventure kind of ended up into two parts. So we have Brian from VoCon, Brian Daly in the audience, who did a phenomenal job mapping what could be very obvious routes for folks to take. Especially, we were dropping people off in rather industrialized parts of the riverfront where they had never been on foot before. So we got a lot of feedback that folks were quite comfortable in these curated groups of multi-interdisciplinary professionals, but if they had just found themselves there where there's not yet the development pressures of the commercial or the recreational that we're seeing have more and more interest along our waterfronts, that there would have been a lack of confidence in how to navigate back into the city. And I think that what we, and those of us that are design professionals, this probably resonates, Kevin Lynch's Imaging the City, our perception of our environment, of the built environment, is so critical to our perception of safety and the way that we navigate. And most cities, and you know, Cleveland is not exempt for this, we really think about in a series of islands or deserts or nodal opportunities. And that's where a lot of these major projects also come into play, where we've got phenomenal existing resources, whether it's Edgewater, as Greg mentioned, or potential plans as we see coming online at the lakefront and the riverfront. But the connectivity between those major projects and those places that we want to be is where the fabric kind of breaks apart. And so that's really where this initiative of From Cleveland to Coastland is interested in, that connectivity, which was the whole idea of asking people to on foot navigate through places that you don't often find yourself doing out of choice.
Yeah, I was going to add that, you know, all of us who work in the design fields, architects, landscape architects, you know, even civil engineers and other types of engineers that deal with the built environment, we get hired for a project and we work together on that project. But rarely do we think about the city as a design problem. And so this effort has really been about getting us all together to do something we all love. We all probably played SimCity when we were kids, like making our own city. But applying our love for Cleveland and our love for the built environment and working together on the city as a design problem rather than any one individual. And if you look at the history of our city, even Tower City, which is a prime example of how we tend to build around here, we get a big project and we do that big project and it's great. And then we do another one over here, but we don't always think about the connective tissue in between.
And I'm curious, kind of stemming from, again, the design your own adventure activity, were there any like surprises? I'm sure you all had done the research, had done the higher level look at what access looks like, but were there any surprises for you that came directly from the community? Melanie, do you want to start? Sorry to put you on the spot. But.
Yeah, no, it was absolutely very interesting to see the photos and the videos that we gathered from people, some easy things that we had identified that are immediate fixes that we could potentially take on, like wayfinding. You know, how do you start right here and find your way to the lake or the river? So that's something simple that our group can collaborate on, and then we can continue this conversation. You know, today we have these boards in the plaza that people can interact with. We're going to continue saving this information and working together as a collaborative effort.
I think one thing that lots of the different groups came back with, there's very specific detailed information that we're sharing with our public partners who are the owners and that have the true opportunity to implement some of these suggestions. But overall, this idea of bringing more joy to the community. So, you know, if you think about the East Bank of the Flats and the topography, the difference from the warehouse district, or if you're out where City Hall is on Lakeside Avenue, again, the topographical difference between getting down to the lakefront. If you drive that might not be so much of your perception, but if you walk that, if you're pushing a stroller, if you're in a wheelchair, you definitely notice that there's not shade, there's not really places to stop for people to gather that are comfortable, that are convenient, that give you confidence that you're even headed in the right direction, that there is a body of water at the end of this walk. But thinking about ways that we can just improve those little places where you might start to think to yourself, why didn't I jump in my car? Why didn't I hop on the RTA? because when you are experiencing something on foot, you're getting just a whole different sense of the city. You're hearing the music coming from the music boxes. Again, you're not hearing that if you're in your car, right? You're experiencing Cleveland in a whole different way, and that's what we want. We want people on the streets. I mean, we want people to be sitting out here like we all are doing now. And how do we encourage that on a daily basis without having to design events around it is, again, I think another key learning opportunity that came out of our walking tour.
Any thoughts, Greg?
Yeah, I was thinking about, we were like, Euclid Avenue is behind us, and Euclid Avenue, we thought about that once as a project, and I think there's some successful results from it. Even just the patterning of the sidewalk gives identity to the street as a place. And I think if we did more of that, and I think that's what came out of, a lot of people's responses, is like the street didn't necessarily feel great. As Ali said, there wasn't shade, there wasn't a place to sit, but it also didn't have a clear design and identity as a place. And if you think of some of the greatest streets in the world, you can imagine them in your head. If you've traveled to other cities, they have clear identities with an architectural language that's expressed in the street lamps and the texture on the sidewalk and the choice of the furniture and even the types of plants that are planted. And so a little bit more of that in our city would go a long way, because we live in a really beautiful city with lots of great districts and spots, but the space in between is often like a no man's land.
And I wanted to ask you, when it comes to a vision for a well-connected Cleveland, are there comparable cities that have done this work well that we could potentially model after? But also, how do we do that work without copy pasting a solution from another city into Cleveland, if that makes sense?
Yeah, so we talk a lot in our city about Chicago, and we look to Chicago because, they have a great lakefront with parks on it and everything. And there are some comparisons, just like there's comparisons to, with Cleveland to a lot of other cities. But in many ways, Cleveland is different. Cleveland's built on a bluff above the waterfront. We didn't have a fire like Chicago, so we didn't have the opportunity to just replan the whole city, have Daniel Burnham there to, create this great plan. I personally think that Toronto has a lot of lessons we can learn. They're a very dense, walkable city, but they also have a freeway that goes right along their waterfront and a very thin strip of land that you can build on. And they've done a really great job of making that a human-scaled place with public transit, lots of parks, lots of residential life. And I think one common thing, too, is that in many cities, they understand that you have a waterfront, you have a public space, and then you have a street, and then you have your buildings after that. And that gives everybody access to the water, and it actually generates a lot more activity, because I can live in that apartment and have just as great a view, even if as if my apartment was right on the water, right? And then the shops down on the ground, they benefit from having the park and the water across the street. And that kind of setup, if we could do more of that here, over time, what we've tended to do, and maybe this goes back to the legacy of the factory had to be on the water, to ship things. And also we use the waterways, as a place to dump the waste, which people did for thousands of years. That was just a function of a river in a city. But I think if we could just rearrange our spaces a little bit and think about them a little bit differently, there's no telling how great we can become.
Yeah, I'll just add, I think there's a lot of opportunity to learn from other communities. And sometimes it's not, oftentimes I would encourage us not to just do the copy and paste of what looks like a success somewhere else. Dan said today, hey, Ferris wheel, that has been done. We don't necessarily, I don't think we need one here in Cleveland. The wind load would, ask anyone who's built something on the waterfront. But at the Greater Cleveland Partnership a couple of years ago, we did quite a bit of research into case studies. We looked at Seattle, Louisville, Cincinnati, other cities that have done this, and not necessarily, and certainly not just to copy and paste from a physical environment standpoint, but looking at the tools and the way that they were able to get this done. Because I think, and a lot of us in the audience have probably felt this, whether you've been on the side of going to a public meeting over and over again for the same plot of land, and you're like, just make this the park already, right? That we do a lot of planning, and it's really time for us to start implementing. And I think because we are at such a critical time now where we are starting to see a lot of those economic development tools be put into place, and we are so close to building a lot of major projects that have been talked about for a long time, this is where it is also so critical to work on that connection, to make sure that we are preserving the space for the public boardwalk along along the riverfront so that it doesn't become privatized, because Cleveland, Ohio actually is the most privatized of all of the Great Lakes states when it comes to public access. And that's something that dates back to the public doctrine that's in effect here that says really the ordinary shoreline is the division between what is public and private space, which exists only here in Ohio and other states, Michigan most especially. They have changed that so that the land, the property landward of any body of water is inherently a public access point because it's a public good and not to be privately held. So there's a lot of policy too, I think, that we can adopt from other places to enable the projects that we're all really wanting to see happen here in our community.
And so I'm wondering if we can talk a bit about, again, focusing in on the partnership a bit. How unique is this approach to finding a solution for connectivity here in Cleveland? And Melanie, maybe we can start with you. I'm curious, what should city stakeholders be thinking about using collaboration to solve this problem?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have been talking about how we see downtown as a fragmented space. And again, the connectivity, how challenging it is to walk from one area for another. However, there are partners in Cleveland who are doing amazing work. And again, busting these silos, working together in partnerships with not only the organizations that are here today, but additional organizations that are doing really great things on the water. I see some of them here today too. So, continuing to collaborate and connect and work together. For example, the Cleveland Metro Parks are doing an amazing job at laying down some infrastructure along the river. So if we do have an opportunity to have public access waterfront in the future, they are laying down that infrastructure to make that connectivity early so we can start working with those individual property owners who own property along the Cuyahoga River, for example. So there are, things in mind that we can do from the ULI perspective, stitching all of those efforts together. And making sure that everybody is communicating and open to collaboration.
Any other thoughts?
I don't know. I think it was, I'm sure they've done it other places. You don't want to be like, oh, I'm the first person who ever did this, because you're probably not. There's like 8 billion people on the planet.
Right.
But I think it's rare to get an interdisciplinary approach to a big design problem like this. And I know we're all having fun with it, because I know lots of people, landscape architects and urban planners and stuff, we enjoy getting together and be able to do this because we haven't done it that much in the past, So I think that's been really great, is approaching it that way.
And I guess to add on that too, having those different perspectives gives you an opportunity to include diverse voices. So, encouraging that mobility throughout the city, regardless of income or who you are, making sure that that's accessible to everybody.
And before we head into Q&A, I want to ask, once this vision is achieved, can we talk a bit about the benefits that it'll have, not only for Cleveland residents, but tourists, visitors, the local economy? Greg, do you mind?
Well, yeah, the waterfront, people like being by water naturally, all people all around the world. And if we could leverage our waterfront more for living and entertainment, because the economy's changed, we still are an industrial city, we still have a good industrial base. But we have the opportunity now to leverage assets that a lot of cities don't have. And in talking about assets that a lot of cities don't have, we have water. A lot of cities have water. Many cities don't have waterfronts as spectacular as ours, with possibility, because they're a city that's more inland on a river. But additionally, I think another one of our assets is our industrial heritage and our industrial architecture that's left over, that I don't know that we appreciated enough, and we've demolished a lot of it. But it's one of the things that makes us very unique and would make us interesting to a lot of people who come here to visit. So I think as we develop the waterfronts, we need to be thoughtful about how we can weave things together instead of wholesale demolish an area and replant something new, but weaves a lot of what's existing there, because that brick and the form of a factory and the smokestacks and even the bridges that we all love downtown, many are down on the flats, many of which are not functional anymore. Those are iconic things that are a part of who we are. And, that creates this connective tissue between all of our memories and the generation below us and the generation above, being able to tell stories and connect that story to an actual place or a thing.
Yeah, and I'll just say that the identity of Cleveland as a waterfront city is something that more and more partners are talking about, which is phenomenal, especially from a tourism perspective with Destination Cleveland. But what is going to work really well for Clevelanders and for all Clevelanders, including the least amongst us, is inherently going to be good for tourists. So if we really take the perspective of how we can include everyone, and I think that's the other thing that, we're talking about professional, largely design organizations starting this collaboration, but because it's an open process, we the next couple of adventures we do, I mean, all of you, I hope will show up and invite your friends and your neighbors. It's really an opportunity for us to reclaim the community as ours and have an opportunity to share your feedback. That's what we're hoping you'll do at the charrette today. And the identity of Cleveland, again, moving it from the sort of the headline and the logo and the branding to the reality for everyone, I think will be so critical. And in the vast community engagement that I've been a part of for the past couple of years, as we talk about repositioning ourselves as this coastland and this waterfront community, a lot of people have been really disconnected from these bodies of water, physically, socially, culturally. And so we have to understand that. We have to start from that place of healing and continue to move forward. I personally believe, and I think, again, by really being most inclusive and opening up the circle in this conversation will be a fantastic way to get us there and to, again, truly just have that idea of a waterfront community resonate with everyone. Will improve our economy. It'll be great for everybody.
And it sounds like you touched on my next question for you, which was the next steps for the partnership, but also with this being a collaboration that operates separately from the city of Cleveland, what are the sort of long-term goals and what role will you all play in pushing this vision forward? Melanie, if you don't mind.
Yeah. So like I mentioned, we have identified some short-term goals that we would like to continue to accomplish. Continuing the conversation today, we'll share all of the information from our Part 2 walking tour that we got as well, in addition to the information today on at least the ULI Cleveland website, cleveland.uli.org, in addition to our other partners as well. So keep an eye out. There's a sign-up form over there for more information. We can continue the conversation, continue hosting events, but ultimately, we're pulling together these experts in their fields. And so we want to turn that into action. We don't want to just keep talking about this. So, taking realistic steps and sharing that with the city and sharing that with those partners who can actually, make things happen that we're talking about, not just talking. And again, we have these amazing partners, Downtown Cleveland, for example, and their organization. We can collaborate with them to do some simple little things like Greg had mentioned, plantings, wayfinding. That could be a great start for this conversation.
Thank you. I think we're ready to move into Q&A. So for our live stream audience, I'm Zaria Johnson, reporter and producer at IdeaStream Public Media and moderator for today's conversation. Today, I am joined by Melanie Cortica, Executive Director of the Urban Land Institute Cleveland, Allison Lucas C. Love, Managing Director of Major Projects at Greater Cleveland Partnership, and Gregory Soltis, Senior Designer at RDL Architects. We are talking about past, present, and future visions to transform our downtown into a coastland. We welcome questions from anyone, City Club members, guests, and those joining via our live stream at cityclub.org. If you'd like to text a question for our guest, please text it to 330-541-5794, and City Club staff will try to work it into the program. A reminder to keep your question short, to the point, and actually a question, so we can get to as many questions as possible. May we take the first question, please? Hi.
Hi, my name is Laura McShane. I'm wearing a yellow blazing paddle.
Nice.
Or Share the River shirt. I'm going to go swimming after this. I'll take the number 45 to the city of Brooklyn with an outdoor pool. And yesterday, a couple of days ago, I was in Euclid. Thank you very much, Allie, for all the work that you've done in Euclid. The Euclid Creek is another waterfront. And my question, when I was there, I witnessed families with their kids in the creek. People want to be in the river or in the creek or in the lake. And my question is, what is Cleveland doing to expand that access? And I want to bring up the fact that yesterday the Wall Street Journal did a story about the Seine. People are swimming in the Seine. Now, would I swim in the Cuyahoga? No. would I swim? You know, I mean, but it's working on. We're working on it, and I think the sewer district is part of this too. So my question is, how do you swim in Cleveland?
So that's a really great question, Laura. And if you look at some other cities I can't remember the city exactly, but in Denmark or in the Netherlands, they actually have these floating pools that float in the river. So you're in the river, but not in the river, that are very successful. On Toronto's waterfront, they actually have beach areas that, it's like a big, gigantic rectangle of concrete filled in with sand. And then they have, umbrellas. And so you may not jump into the water, but you can be at the beach, in the urban core. So there's a number of creative ways that we could be at the water and be in the water without necessarily being in the Cuyahoga River. Although it's much cleaner now than it ever has been. So you would, if you did swim in it, you'd be fine.
Yeah, absolutely. That idea of a borrowed landscape has come up in a number of planning projects, and the Anacostia waterfront also does an excellent job of that. Also provides a great level of safety, right? So you don't have to be the strongest of swimmers in order to experience that water, but you get that perception of, I'm in water, I'm viewing another body of water. Maybe your brain kind of equates that you're actually in the lake. I do swim in the lake. The river is another, because of all the traffic, right? It's also just another sort of level of concern and safety to be cautious of, and not because none of us up here are representatives of the Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District, so I wouldn't want to speak with them, but speak to their work. But recently, both Euclid Beach, Edgewater, and also the Cuyahoga River were delisted as areas of concern, which is a huge triumph. Many of you probably know that the EPA was created because of the headlines of the fire that happened here. We celebrated that a couple of years ago, the 50th anniversary of the last time our river caught on fire. So incredible progress has been made, and it does get safer and safer. But there's still much more work to be done, and I think bringing people to the water to be able to touch it in whatever way they're comfortable with, and providing a myriad of opportunities to do that, to meet people where they are, is absolutely what we need to continue to work towards.
And just to quickly chime in too, from a real estate and land use perspective along the river, we are seeing just millions, if not billions of dollars worth of investment in the infrastructure right now. So to one of our previous points, we see this momentum now. We want to keep that momentum going with a coordinated effort. And also a lot of people don't realize that the Cuyahoga River is a federal shipping lane. And so there's a lot of traffic, and it's really important to get into, but as a route for goods and services as well.
Next question.
All right, Mike Kristoff, longtime Cleveland cheerleader. My question actually relates to something you were just touching on, and it relates to how can public intention and plans and perspectives start to influence and also attract private investment. And what I would hope you can expand a little bit on is referential to something that happened in Columbus. So in Columbus, they developed actually a pretty big loop. And in order to develop the design of that loop, they actually engaged development owners all along the entire loop. And it's probably the best example I've seen in recent history of how to get private companies to jump in and start thinking about, if 30,000 is the goal for additional residents by 2030, which is, I think, what Columbus set at that time, they got developers to commit. Okay, I own this site, I can build that. How are we starting to think about how do we take this public perspective and intention forward with private partnerships to kind of make that happen?
Yeah, I would definitely say, building off my previous comment about the Urban Land Institute Technical Assistance Panel that we did along the Cuyahoga Riverfront, where the bulkheads and the infrastructure can sometimes be a barrier to economic development. Some of our ideas from the report, for example, possible special improvement district. We had given some recommendations to the port, the city, Flats Forward, who were involved in those conversations. And it is a challenge because the riverfront has so many different owners along that property. But do they really want to maintain those bulkheads along the river when we have boats kind of smashing into them? It's called collision bend for a reason, right? So maybe there's a partner that can, again, the Metro Parks or the city, Flats Forward, who can take on some of that responsibility, not to throw stuff on them, but ULI will serve as a convener of these different experts, and then we'll be able to share this information, hopefully for action, to be able to see some things happen.
I also think with the recently passed at the City of Cleveland Community Benefits Ordinance that there's real opportunity in those development agreements to have conversations around the physical community benefit that comes from making a development. And, I think what we have to do and what part of the Coastland vision and the action that Melanie mentioned has to be being very clear about, well, what is that community benefit that's not just going to result in a quarter-mile walking path that doesn't connect to something meaningful, right? So that we end up thinking more holistically about that community benefit beyond the individual development parcel that the agreement's associated with.
Part of the walking tour also identified areas for infill development as well. And that's something that we want to continue doing, walking tours to identify sites for possible development as well. And, work with those smaller property owners to see what we can make happen, work with the city to make it easier for developers to develop here in Cleveland, things like that as well.
And I think we should also mention that the city has, been working on trying to get greater access to the lakefront for many administrations. And if you look at the riverfront plan, I saw Arthur from OHM here, and I know his firm worked with the city with Director Collier on creating a master plan for the River Valley. And a lot of that had to do with laying out a vision for creating better access to the lake. But then that has to be followed up with incentives and also with maybe changes in zoning. So you can put a park in, you can change the zoning, and that is another way to incentivize developers, because who doesn't want to live near the water? And I'm mentioning that effort, but everybody should know that there are many people who have worked in the planning department and in the private sector over decades who have been rethinking and re-envisioning creating better access to the waterfront. And we should acknowledge that we have made a lot of strides. Even North Coast Harbor was something in the 80s that was put in. And so we are slowly getting there.
Great question, great insight. Thank you. Hi.
Yeah, we've been hearing a roar of conversation about the downtown lakefront, but we have what you might call a water access desert between Euclid Beach and Edgewater, which will only be slightly changed, but moved to the east a little bit by downtown. So I'm wondering where the conversations are about making the water accessible from places like East 72nd, East 55th, the MLK boat launch, the places that I go to as an East Side resident.
Yeah, well, your question is absolutely indicative of, again, that nodal major project planning. So you've got opportunity and ownership at East 55th and East 72nd, where previously the city and then the state and now the Metro Parks has ownership and responsibility to maintain and provide those as amazing public access. The Cheers project, right? I mean, that's a 30+ year vision until we'll see that completely realized as these barrier islands that create new opportunity for the east side to access the lakefront in the same or a comparable way, a complementary way to what the west side has. I mean, the Euclid model, which was referenced earlier, is something that Cuyahoga County is continuing to advocate for and is very close to having bids sold for a project on the east side to connect Euclid Beach. Because we need to my earlier point of that public trust doctrine that really holds us back from having unilateral public access because of the way, from a policy perspective, we value that land use as a privately held good versus a publicly held good. We unfortunately need to have projects that are reliant on these public-private partnerships in order to get done those trail connectivities. So, I mean, absolutely in the long term, you've got a number of partners, including NOACA, the county, the city, others outside of the central core really working on expanding that access. It's gonna take time and it's gonna take persistence. And again, I think, for right now, especially because we're focused on the walkability aspect of Coastland, we've been focused on downtown. I mean, I can see us continuing to advocate for this vision in other communities that are coastal and other counties and other cities that exist within Cuyahoga County, and continuing to use all of the expertise and lived experiences and professionalism that this group can bring to help those communities achieve that public access goal.
I just wanted to point out, if you've not been to the Cleveland Nature Preserve, which is actually built on dredge from the river, it's at the end of Martin Luther King Boulevard where it runs into the lake. You park there. There's a little thing you have to go through so that it doesn't let the deer in to eat everything. But you get great lake views from there. It's like walking through a beautiful, quiet forest, and it's great for bird watching in the spring and the fall. So, and that's in between that, or in that zone.
Because Greg mentioned that, it made me think of one of the results that we saw from a couple of teams in our walking adventure, that they were surprised at times when they turned a corner and then they could see the river or the lake. And so sometimes that surprise is good, right? It brings joy. It's like, oh, I found something, but we don't always want to be surprised that we've stumbled across a river or a lake, right? We want there to be intentionality and identity and an ease of wayfinding and navigating and getting somewhere, which again just builds that confidence for all of us to continue to navigate our cities.
And I'm curious, this is touching on next steps again, and maybe it's too soon to say, but could we see a similar design your own adventure workshop on the east side to better understand what the islands look like there and what connectivity could look like? Yeah, whoever. I'm sorry.
Why not? We like doing that stuff.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think we're always down to have an event like that or something similar. Be creative with other types of events for us to get continue this conversation.
So TBD. It sounds like TBD. Yeah. Thank you. Next question.
My name's Barton Reese. The question I have is this: first off, I applaud you guys for getting together with this collaboration, because we do have a silo issue in Cleveland. It's the way it is. So how are you engaging? For example, you got Dan Gilbert has a vision that he wants to do on the Cuyahoga River. You got City of Cleveland with their vision, what they want to do for the lakefront. You have your vision. How do you make sure that that don't clash with these other visions also? How do you make sure that's still a collaborative effort?
Well, and that's a great question, and we've talked a lot about that prior to this event. And that is in thinking about the city itself as the design problem. So really zooming out. We're looking at the city from like 20,000 feet in the air and thinking not just about each of those individual projects, but the connective tissue in between. So the streets, the trails, the sidewalks, any public spaces, so that you can walk in between all those buildings, in between all those various projects, whatever they are, and it be a really great experience in and of itself. So that's a great question, and that's how we've been trying to address it, by thinking of the city as the design problem instead of the individual projects within the city. So zooming out.
Thank you. Hi.
So we have a text question. I heard the salinity or salt content of the Cuyahoga River has been skyrocketing, in part due to the use of rock salt during the winter, among other causes. What has your research found regarding preventing pollutants like salt into our coastlands?
Are you all looking at pollution? It sounds like more like an environmental side of the...
I mean, we look at it in the sense that a place has to be ecologically healthy enough for human beings to want to be there. But yeah, we didn't look at that issue.
No, that sounds like a question for me as a reporter I should be looking at. So thank you for that question. Do we have another text question?
Yes. What are you most looking forward to?
Oh yeah, is there any project that, or any idea, any potential connectivity that excites you, or maybe one of the projects that are already underway that you're looking forward to?
I was hoping that the Hewlett unloaders would be, one of them would be refurbished and put on the lake, but it's going to be in Canton. Canton's a nice place. So at least one of them was saved, but I would look forward to more of our industrial legacy, the objects, the elements. Some of them are amazing if you ever do the research. We just take for granted that, robotic arms and stuff do everything nowadays, but what our ancestors did was crazy. So I would be looking forward to more of that being saved, because it's really interesting and it makes us unique compared to most of the cities in the world.
I have to say, personally, I'm looking forward to so much of the development that's happening along the riverfront. I'm a rower, and so it's so cool to be able to be in a recreational vehicle and go past the new commercial developments that are just like seemingly overnight grown on the Scranton Peninsula and by Columbus Road, and then get down into the Industrial Valley and really see what Melanie had referenced before, but that critical pipeline of the freighters, that is just like, it's such a unique thing, right? For any of us to be sitting at a restaurant or just to be enjoying the boardwalks that exist, the public access that is there along the riverfront, and see our industry today working the way it did 100 plus years ago, right? And to think of how ways for us to continue to preserve that. Also recently, and there's a number of folks in the audience that have been engaged in initial conversations around this idea of a bi-national Great Lakes waterfront trail. And I think, again, to a question around economy and tourism and visitorship, but even just for us locally, again, from a wayfinding, from a confidence standpoint, to be able to connect to all of these nodal projects that do exist with waterfront access, and have that be something like the Buckeye Trail, right, which you can take north-south here in the state of Ohio. But to think about taking that all throughout not only the 8 Great Lakes states, but also into Canada, I think that's an untapped opportunity and something that I'm personally really excited to see come to fruition.
I absolutely agree with everything that Greg and Allison have said. Couldn't have said it any better. You know, very exciting projects that are taking place right now. Lots of opportunities for future development as well.
Awesome. Thank you. Appreciate it. Hi.
Hi, my name is Katie Miller, and I want to thank you guys for being up here and for being willing to field so many questions. But I want to kind of put a pin into the text message question that came in about the salinity. I too am a rower. I'm on the lake all the time, swimming in the lake, rowing. I was paddleboarding this morning on the lake. So I trust the water, but I am also an epidemiologist, so I'm worried about the water quality. And I would really urge you guys to not ignore the pollution issue. We have a serious plastic problem. Microplastics are a big thing. They're present. There's a great movie I want to put a plug in for called Ripples of Plastic that was made about our lake, and all these great local heroes are profiled in that movie. So my question is, as a rower, like I was rowing the other day before the big storm, you can't ignore all the plastic bottles. They're all on the surface. So what or whom is working on the plastic problem? I think we can only do so much in our kayaks and our canoes. So, and many other larger cities, like you've been referencing, have dedicated plastic trash cleanup in their rivers. And we know what's happening with these new bulkheads. They're just funneling more of the plastic into the lake. So what are we doing about permanent structure to capture this before it continues to contaminate? Thanks again.
Thank you.
Well, I guess the first thing I'll say is, again, we need to open up our arms wider, right, to incorporate more professionals into this built environment conversation, because you're absolutely right. It has an impact. And again, to go back to the perception of a place, if you see trash, whether it's organic or organic material built up along the waterfronts, that's going to hinder your appreciation or potential access to it. But there are a number of groups working, and I'm sure I'm going to miss quite a few of them, but at a really small scale, Trash Fish. I mean, Eddie is out there doing really fantastic work, bringing a lot of volunteers, bringing a lot of people down to paddle on the river who have never been in a recreational vessel like that before. So I think that on a multi-fronts, that's really awesome. Argonaut is doing quite a bit. There's a number of folks that are, associated with those students, that they're learning real world skills that are going to, set them up for really good jobs into the future, working with the Coast Guard, moving again. Sometimes it's the organic material, all of the trees and other debris, logs and driftwood, et cetera, that we get on the river. But in the sewer district, I mean, again, so many partners, the area of concern working groups that have been working, Freshwater Institute that Emily and the county have recently initiated. So lots of thought partnership that I think the best way to maybe conclude is to just say, like, in our future discussions should absolutely widen that net in terms of conversations that we have about the built environment and connections to our coastline.
Yeah, thank you for that question, for that insight. I appreciate it. Hi.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name's Jason Burek. I'm a resident of Cleveland. I'm a designer, and this is kind of a local design question. Wanted to get your thoughts on this. When I first started working in 1999, I worked in this building right here. And when you walked out onto East 9th Street in 1999, there was a lot of energy, a lot of people in those office buildings. And that has dwindled a bit over the years. Office to residential conversion continues to be a prominent adaptive reuse strategy. So my question is, when you think about connecting East 9th Street to North Coast Harbor, we have the East 9th Street Bridge overpass. In Columbus, there was a project completed about 10 years ago where there was an overpass on High Street. Someone built this very Renaissance Brunellesque buildings on either side.
On High Street.
It bridged both sides of that community. As we continue to contemplate a land bridge that's disconnected from East 9th Street and West 3rd Street, do we think there would be more value in amplifying East 9th Street and West 3rd Street rather than create a wholly new connection in the middle?
I think that both have to be done. And you bring up great points, because if we could do more of those land bridges with buildings on them, that would be amazing, because you connect that fabric. I think something else, there was a guy named Hausman who kind of replanned Paris, and we would not want to do what he did and demolish and reorganize Cleveland and plan it in the same way. We have a decent organization, but we need to think about view sheds, things that draw you, down. So like if you're on East 9th Street and you're looking down towards the water and there was some vertical element, whatever it would be, that would let you know, oh, there's something there to go to, right? There's like those kinds of smaller design tweaks in our city could help a lot. And when I say smaller design tweaks, I don't just mean like the view shed and having like a point of termination, but also what you mentioned, potentially extending the urban fabric on a bridge over the railroad tracks. I know that there are plans in the works to put a multimodal transit center there. That could be an opportunity to do some of the things you're talking about. And then thinking about the big projects we've done, we oftentimes think about that too when we design a space. We have like this building and that building, but even on that scale, we need to like create better connective tissue and reasons for people to be in that space. So there would be people down, on the pier with lots of energy when you go down there even today.
The project that you had mentioned along High Street, I believe you were talking about the CAP, which connects High Street downtown and OSU University District along that major corridor. And that was another example of a really great partnership between the property owner, the landlord, the developer, and the city. And we had also incorporated the Short North Alliance, the CDC that manages the Arts District there too. So talking about partnerships, that was a really, somebody, in a community meeting just had an idea like, hey, what if we just make this a little bit more walkable? And that's what came out of it. So, again, continuing conversations like this, bringing partners in.
I'll just say, I think that another thing, we've talked about silos, something that's also, unfortunately, in my view, emblematic of Cleveland is this idea of a scarcity mindset versus an abundance mindset. So I think, like Greg said, it's a both and situation. And in addition to East 9th Street, which is an incredibly important commercial corridor that's connecting, what will eventually not be, hopefully, a highway at the north end, but a boulevard, but the highway linkages to the south and all of the development in between. We also have to think about West 3rd and the major development potential of that corridor. And then when you think about the land bridge, West 3rd, East 9th are probably going to continue to be opportunities to continue to move through, right? They're thoroughfares, but the land bridge can be a place in and of itself. And that's where I think you've seen a lot of success when you look at what Philadelphia is building now, what Louisville built, in terms of creating that place that's part of a transportation network, but also, again, has those opportunities to be and to linger. So your destination might still be that 9th Street Pier, but there's more enjoyment and more to experience and discover about the city on your way to that final destination.
Thank you. I do think we're at time for questions. I'm sorry, I know you've been waiting for a while, but I would encourage you and anyone else who's here in person to stay around. There's a charrette that'll still be going on, I think, for about 30 minutes after to ask more questions or to share your opinions. But I want to thank you, Melanie, Allison, and Gregory for joining us at City Club today. The City Club's Outdoor Summer Series is presented by Thompson Hine and also a part of City Club in the Community Series sponsored by Bank of America. A special thanks to Playhouse Square IT for making transmission of this live stream possible. This Friday, August 1st, the City Club will be hearing from Janice Contreras, Executive Director of Northeast Ohio Hispanic Center for Economic Development, where she will talk about the successes and challenges facing the organization, the opening of Central Via 25, and learn what it truly takes to build success in Cleveland's Latino community. You can see what else is coming up at the City Club at cityclub.org. Thank you once again to our panel, and thank you, members and friends of the City Club. I'm Zaria Johnson, and this forum is now adjourned.